You can make everyone love security and whatever, but you can make them.
Not possible.
It's not possible, right? That's not a realistic goal. But going ahead and focusing on solving their problems, and then what happens? You have a reputation of every time they come to me, I'm solving problems for them. I don't have a reputation of giving them work. So that way, when you do that one time where you ask them to do something very specific they didn't plan, you have that social capital to be like, oh, well, Mike solved 5 problems for me and he's asking me to do one. I think that's fair, right? It takes time to build that trust. It's not, if you're working at a startup where there's 100 people and you can just know everyone by name, hopefully that's like less than 6 months. Hey, I have to work with teams where I'm kind of at. Hopefully that's a 6 month to a year, right? If you're working with departments, that might be a year, 1 to 2 years.
Welcome to the season 3 of The Elephant in AppSec,
the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Michael Novack, a seasoned application security architect turned technical product manager. At the time of this recording, he was still working hands-on on AppSec. Outside of his technical roles, Michael has created several education games, most notably Byte Club, a strategic card game that turns complex cybersecurity concepts into fun, accessible learning experience for all. He also gives back to the community by mentoring students in technology and cybersecurity for his work with NPower. In today's episode, we explore whether product security engineering should be a quality engineering and why it needs to go even further as a true extension of technology. We dig into how security training has moved beyond fear-based tactics towards more engaging, integrated approaches and ask what kind of timeline it takes to build genuine trust in security roles. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Michael's opinions. Dive right in.
Hi, Michael. I'm super excited to have you with me on the Elephant in AppSec podcast, especially at the beginning of the year. Everyone comes back from their holiday period, meeting with the family, and now we can talk serious things about security, for people. Even probably the podcast will air a bit later, but yeah, I'm super excited to have you on board with me. And I think we already, discussed a little bit before together about the topic. And I think when we discussed previously, you mentioned you don't like, that people actually make cybersecurity and technology kind of separate domains, that it's more extension, like natural extension of one of another. And it's a lot about actually security is like quality engineering. No, it's an extension of engineering with the quality engineering. But a lot I saw actually on LinkedIn, I think some people disagreed with that. How do you respond to those critics who disagree with this concept? With your thoughts?
Sure. So how I got into cybersecurity was I was a software engineer initially, and I saw someone doing basically a conference where they did hacking and whatnot. It was like a pen testing demo. I was like, that was magic. And so my natural instinct wasn't, oh, this is a separate magic domain. This is, well, they clearly understand this system well enough to do stuff that I didn't know how to do as the builder. Right.
Yeah.
So when I'm going ahead and thinking about when I was learning cybersecurity and when I still do it, right, I think of it as I have to know how to build it, but then I have to know it so deep enough to be able to know how to exploit it. And so that's why it's just a natural extension. I think of myself as a technologist first and then a cybersecurity practitioner, not the other way around. Because without that base of knowing how things work, how can you know how the unhappy path is?
Yeah, it's all about understanding really in depth, the application, how and then how will potential attacker will feel when they try also to go for different routes, right? But if we, for example, treat the security, as quality engineering, as understanding, that quality part does this, for example, this risk, maybe we analyze this risk kind of differently from different perspective as, as someone who would just treat security as security per se.
Yeah, but it's actually even less of a nuanced technical thing that it creates a cultural us versus them unnecessarily. Okay. Right? When I go ahead and I talk to my technologist folks, my software engineers, my architects and whatever and said, hey, we're just trying to build the best product. I happen to ask questions that are about this exploit, but I don't use that language. I just say, hey, what happens if you do blah? And if they don't know, that means they don't understand what they're building well enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I'll even talk not in the nature of security language. I'll just be like, hey, what are all of those edge cases you didn't think about, right? Independent of security.
Did you have a
And then it
case?
creates an us, and then it creates a we together trying to figure it out, rather than security talking to tech and talking security. It's just, hey, we're in a room trying to build the best product and think of all the edge cases.
Did you have like a specific moment before or a specific project, that you worked on where you made someone realize, oh, I actually don't understand in depth what I'm building and how should I kind of make it secure?
So is there a specific project? I'm trying to think about that. So it's normally a gradual thing over time. And what I find is people first come to me saying, hey, Mike, can you help me solve these security problems, right? That's where it normally starts. And then, I kind of come from that very specific lens because that's how they ask and that's how they want to frame the conversation. But over time, they kind of see that I just keep angling it saying, hey, if you know what you're building and you can fully justify it, then it's probably going to be secure, right? And then they start coming to me just saying, hey, can you just review this just from a general perspective, right? So it's not normally one specific time. It's normally multiple sessions over multiple projects. Is that I built that relationship with someone for over a year, right? Or whatever,
And so the whole project might take up to a year to actually finalize. So usually, how long does the project of that specific process take?
Yeah, so in my current role, you can almost think of me as like an internal security consultant for part of what I do, right? I drive my own bringing new security capabilities for the tech audience to consume, but also part of what I do is I am like, hey, there's this specific security issue that they're not sure how to figure out. There's this technical problem they're not sure how to figure out. I'd like some additional thoughts, right? And so they'll come in and pull me in. So I'm going ahead and consulting on maybe like 20 different projects at the same time. And then I'll go ahead and I'll be like, hey, this is a thought. They'll give me the context. We'll talk about it. And then they'll go and do stuff for 3 months. Like without, I'm not involved. I'm not an owner of the project. They have a specific thing that they need help with. I help them with that thing. And then they might come back and maybe it's the same app, but now it's project number 2 and it's a totally different thing, right? So I'm not like an owner of the projects that I'm talking about. Now there are projects I drive that are bringing new security capability to the tech org, which is like 80% of my job. But 20% of my job is just, hey, I'm your hopeful security consultant. If you need design or code or whatever things to figure out, I'm here to help out. Right.
How would you recommend someone to build this relationship of actually that developers come to them, consider them, the friendly security consultant or not a work generator?
So focus on solving their problems. If they come to you with a problem, right, you first focus on that. So a lot of times the conversation happens in twofold, right? It either comes from have this tool, like we have a CI/CD pipeline, right? So, hey, we have this bug issue, right? Or not this bug. We have this scan found item, right? And you take the time not only to say do X, but you actually like say, hey, let me go look at your code and help you say like, this is what to do. This is the code example. This is, if you do this, this is going to make the scanner pass, right? Now, some people will just stop there, right? Most people will just be like, okay, I made my scanner pass. Yay. Right. But I also at the same time try to explain like why this is a thing, right? Let me explain like why this is even a thing to talk about. And some people bite and some people don't, right? I'm not going to say that it's everyone, you can make everyone love security and whatever, but you can make them.
It's not possible.
It's not possible, right? That's not a realistic goal. But going ahead and focusing on solving their problems. And then what happens, you have a reputation of every time they come to me, I'm solving problems for them. I don't have a reputation of giving them work, right? And then those few times where I say, guys, this is like a real big problem. We really need to do this. Is this a hill I'm willing to die on? So you need to build up that social credibility of solving their problems enough. So that way, when you do that one time where you ask them to do something very specific they didn't plan, you have that social capital to be like, oh, well, Mike solved 5 problems for me and he's asking me to do 1. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah, so you build your reputation and then your reputation works for you.
But that takes time. It takes time to build that trust. It's not an overnight thing.
How long do you think it takes time to build someone? Because I think it's product security engineering and application security engineer per se, it's still relatively new role, So a lot of people might come, let's say, company might open a position internally, and a developer, let's say, grow into this role, or sometimes QA engineer as well. And it's quite still new, it's a comparison, let's say, with I don't know, backend developer still. What do you think should be a realistic timeline for someone to actually set them, let's say someone starts a new role, right? And someone starts a product security, application security role in an organization. How long do you think it will take them to build that reputation?
It obviously depends on the size of the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
The bigger the organization, the harder that kind of stuff is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I work at about a medium-sized company right now, about 8,000 people, for context, right? So if you're working at a startup where there's 100 people and you can just know everyone by name, okay, hopefully that's like less than 6 months, right?
Yeah.
If you're working at hey, I have to work with teams, where I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of, hopefully that's a 6 month to a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Time frame. If you're working with departments, right,
Mm-hmm.
that might be a year, 1 to 2 years, right?
Okay.
Because the cycles of the projects are a lot longer and they're a lot bigger, right? And there's just a lot more people that have to try to get to know you, right? Like that's
Yeah.
So that was your first part of your question. I think I
Yeah.
forgot the second part, right? So there's the timeline, and then what was the
I
other
think
part?
it was mainly part was the timeline, for someone, who just starts, because it is quite new. Actually, the definition of product security engineer is quite new. So that's why it's very interesting, to compare the timelines, how long it may take for someone who's maybe listening, to us. They can can compare themselves, for example, to you, to others.
And it can accelerate because a lot of times what I find is because I have this perspective of security as an extension of technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very quickly seen as one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the security person coming in and they talk purely in that jargon and language, right? And it's not like that's not important. We need that, right? But we can talk about that internally with ourselves, right? We don't need to necessarily, like, it's not that that's not helpful, right? It's just, is that helpful for that customer, for that audience you're speaking to, right? By them, once they think that I'm on their side, right? I am just another technologist that happens to know security stuff. Then that trust builds a lot faster. And what I find is a lot of people are like, I don't have security people talk to me like that. They just don't. A lot of people don't have there's a good chunk of the security area that only thinks in the terms of risk and don't know how to build. And then they're put in the position of having to tell the builders how to build. That's a tricky spot to be in if you don't know how to build.
Yeah, I mean, usually, for example, in large organizations, you have product managers who manage, the projects, who tell developers sometimes also how to build or what needs to be built, as well as that was my experience. But security training is often targets, developers. It does not target that much people who are outside of actually the engineering pipeline or work on specifically like building a really part of the feature, but sometimes the spec itself is defined by product managers. And for me, for example, if security is a part of quality, should we also then shift maybe the training and, as you mentioned, building those relationships not only with technical stakeholders, but also maybe with non-technical, stakeholders like product managers who define those initial specs, or not?
No, absolutely. I actually think we need to do a much better job as an industry reaching out to our non-technical audience because who sets the priority for work? Well, not even that high up. Like I'm talking scrum masters, I'm talking about managers, I'm talking about project managers. Like that's who's normally actually setting has the most influence on the backlog with some input from the development team. So if what you're doing, if you're only focusing on the technical audience, the software engineers and things like that, you're giving them knowledge and then having them to force them to play a game of telephone and interpret that and become salesmen on your behalf. Or if we just go directly to the scrum masters and the people they're going to have to convince, and they're already bought in and sold, and we've done that conversation and sales pitch for them, it's a lot easier for them to do it, right? So if we only focus on software engineers, they have to not only be so bought in that they're bought in, but so bought in they're very active advocates. But if we can go ahead and have both sides, the scrum masters and things like that, and the software engineers, both at least reasonably bought in, we don't need anyone to be like extreme advocates and go above and beyond. It's just, oh, yeah, this makes sense to both of us. Cool, let's do that, right? So yeah, I definitely, for my security champions program that I built and we've been running, that's where we started. And that's where I think everyone should start, is with the technical audience. There's more resources there. That's where you should start, right? But at some point, you want to get to a point of maturity of getting out ahead of that and talking the non-technical. And the idea, and just to give you an idea of scope of difference, is we had about 400 people involved when I was focusing on just the tech audience, right? Now we have 800. And so it's doubled. And what happens is a lot of those people, those customer service desks, the accountant, those business folks, not even in tech, right? They're like, this is the first time that anyone's talked to me besides
really?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
normally the response they get. Like, thank you for actually and some of my most active security champions are not in the tech or cybersecurity or
Okay.
like they're just not at all.
Do you have an example of something that, one of those security champions has done or brought up, or how they've impacted organization?
Sure. So I think we're kind of at a transition point where we've gone from kind of like passive content, right? People just coming to consume at like lunch and learns and things like that. And now I set up like a more active way of like a big learning path that people can do to kind of figure out who's really wants to volunteer, is engaged. And now I'm kind of at a transition point where we're going from really like active ownership, right? So it's not just me and the security org that's like saying, hey, we're going to do events and you come. It's like, hey, what do you want to do? And so some of those things that we've done is they'll invite me to like their sessions unprompted to explain stuff in their internal team meetings that I wouldn't have gotten invited to otherwise, right? Because now other things that we've done is we do a monthly, what we call a book club. So I take an article from HackEDU and I say, we're going to break this down via the cyber kill chain. So that way everyone can understand it. Here's a consistent framework that you can understand any event or news or conversation on cybersecurity. This is what the bad guy did, cyber kill chain. You post that. People read it. Some people don't. Whatever. Then we have a monthly meeting where we go ahead and we say, hey, what would you do about it? Filling in stuff using the NIST cybersecurity framework. And using that framework consistently gives enough structure for people to fill in the blanks, but enough ambiguity to go ahead and do some critical thinking. And so some of our moderators are some of those people that I've talked about. So now we're having people that are not in cyber, that aren't in tech, moderating those discussions for the community, right? So
I mean, that's a big step to moderate this.
Right, that's a big step. And so we coach them, and I like kind of behind the scenes and I'll jump in, but like the goal is the less we speak and they speak, that's our measure of success now. That's what we're trying to transition.
Very interesting. At least you definitely can see the final success, in your organization. But do you think you were lucky with the culture of organization that you were able to make such an impact? Or do you think it's purely like the efforts and the people you worked with that actually made this impact?
I can't speak for every organization. Obviously, some were more open to it or not. I will say the organization I'm in does take security seriously, but there definitely was a strong us versus them. A very strong us versus them. We started this journey about 3.5 years ago. So this was a long time. This has not been overnight, right? This was a three and change year journey, right?
Okay.
Where, so it's a long journey. So a little bit of both, right? I'm not gonna claim that I don't know if this would always work in every organization or anything, but I do think this would work more often than people think. I don't think that we as an industry ask enough of people to try to be engaged, right? We say, here's an easy checklist, and if you want to learn anything else, come to me and I'll give you the answers again. Well, then guess what? The next time they need a question, they're going to come to you and ask for the magic answer from the magic security expert. They're not actively critically thinking, right? They can't take ownership. You haven't given them the skills to take ownership.
Yeah. I think quite often, the security chains, at least depends on the size of our organization. But I think the funny story that I have when I worked in aerospace, like security training that I had, 1 month after we arrived in the company, they brought us all in one room, and almost like for half an hour they were telling how bad the Chinese and Russians are. So it does not really, and that you should lock your laptop front of them. So it does not really entice, someone to actually become passionate about security and become more aware and, try to build more, become a security champion, become more impactful, I would say, in our organization.
Yeah, from what you say, it sounds like they're doing a fear-based approach, and that might get people involved, quotation marks for those on the podcast, but that are they going to want to keep engaging? I don't think you're going to get long-term.
That was not my experience.
You're going to get short-term compliance, not long-term buy-in with fear. And then also when you say, again, going back to checklist, you're getting short-term knowledge transfer, but things change. Our environment changes too fast that if the only way they're getting knowledge is when we pre-package a nice PDF that they see once a year in the annual compliance training, and they can't think and make some nuanced decisions a little bit on their own and then ask for us for confirmation, we can't be in every meeting. The security organization can't be in every meeting. It just doesn't scale, right? Those conversations need to happen when we're not there. And if we don't give them the tools to do that, it's not going to happen. Yeah.
But for example, why do you think for security industries quite often it's fear-based, as you mentioned as well? Even to buy a new tool as an application security engineer to validate the budget for it, you need to quite often it's breach happened, or someone else in the industry got hacked, and then you have all the budget you want. But so internally, I think maybe some security engineers kind of adapt this behavior as well because it's being applied to them. How would you recommend them to integrate, this education aspect and change actually the mindset for someone and change that fear-based culture?
Yeah, so let's first say there was a reason for that. And there was a good reason for that culture to evolve. In the 2000s, right, security didn't have a seat at the executive table. Seriously, right? So the only way to get that proper attention was with those tactics, was to point those new papers. So there was a reason why we as an industry needed to do that to be taken seriously. But I do think now we're transitioning at a point in the industry where we have a seriously seat at the table in a lot of places. Everywhere it's different, right? But in a lot of places it's much more. There's the CISO has a pretty prominent seat in a lot of places. Most people won't say, why do we need security? Most people know why they need this security, I would say. They're more saying, I don't want to do the work of it, but they understand why.
Yeah.
But before, 20 years ago, it's what is security was a question, right? So I think there was a reason for that. To go ahead and the way I like to now do my programs and to not rely on that. And again, that can work if you really, really need to. It's just know when you're doing that, you're losing a lot of political capital. So short-term versus long-term game when you do that. The way I like to try to run the programs and sell them is to say, is there an existing tech initiative or business initiative? And how do we go ahead and pitch it together, right? So that way it's just, hey, this is just how we do tech. So a really good example as part of my job was I need to update secrets management at the company. And so I could have gone hard with the security engineering and obviously they were involved in stuff. And said, hey, we're going to do this secrets project. We're going to build stuff and you're going to implement it. And then we're going to make tech use it, right? Okay. Instead, most of my time was actually working with the CI/CD pipeline team and say, how do we integrate it in your roadmap that makes sense to solve this? And so now they're the ones that are adopting and they actually owned it. And they're actually growing it organically without me. I find out, hey, we now updated the secrets process into the latest pipeline. I was not involved because that's just how that technology team operates. Right?
Okay. Interesting.
So going ahead and saying, what's your guys' problems, right? And then actually working with the technology org to go ahead and actually say, this is just another feature that you have.
Did you have any pushback on that when you tried to talk with the people who own CI/CD pipeline? Or were they very receptive?
Through 2 years of regularly helping them solve problems and building trust and things like that. At the time that I did that, they were fairly receptive because I helped them solve various other problems for 2 years, right? If I would have done that on the first day of my job and they're like, who is this Mike guy from security telling me I need to do this new feature in security? They might have done it, but it would have been much more of I have to do this because it's magically in our backlog and security is saying we're doing it, rather than them saying, oh no, this is just how we're going to do work. And then I also did the design with them and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me how this is wrong and we should do this better. And so then they went ahead and made tweaks to the design and things like that. And so now that gave them ownership of it.
Okay,
Right?
interesting.
Because it makes sense for them. It's like, hey, and that's like, great. If it makes sense to you, it makes sense to me, right? I want it to be implemented what makes sense for our environment, not just what I think, right?
Yeah, I think the end goal is basically to make someone understand this is important for me, this is important for what I do, and this contributes, to my objectives in my role. But for example, quite often there is a middle step, which is a QA engineer. You also have engineering, like you have engineering, you have QA. And then security. How do you, for example, work with the QA engineers to make security as like a part of quality or extension of it?
Yeah, so the way that we've done that is a lot of QA engineering is going ahead and essentially finding problems, right? But they actually a lot of times don't have the skill set to know how to fix them.
Okay.
Some of them aren't developers. They don't know how to build stuff. They know how to run pen testing tools. They know how to run exploits, but they don't know how to build stuff. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them, right? And so what happened and then there was the way that I saw this intersection happen the most is, again, in our pipeline, they're scanning things. People would see that there's this vulnerability that's blocking them. And then they go to security assurance and try to make a meeting with them to try to solve the thing, right? The problem is that one, it took a while to get on their calendar because they're busy and, times. And,
Okay.
and then the other thing, so it took a long time, maybe a week or two just to be able to talk to each other. And then the other thing is sometimes the QA engineers didn't know how to fix it because they didn't know how to actually code like deep enough, right? But then we had the CI/CD pipeline team, support team, that also sometimes would get these queries. They knew how to build stuff, but they didn't have enough security context and risk knowledge to know why these are important and what this is. So what we did is on the channel, we made a specific channel that I said, hey, CI/CD pipeline support team, hey, security QA team, don't accept meeting invites, shut down tickets. All conversations go into that Teams channel. And the goal is to save them time in meetings because they were spending a lot of time in meetings. Ask people to post there, answer your questions there, because a lot of things are the same thing repeated over and over again. And most people now you have people from the pipeline support team and the QA team talking in the same thread in real time, and people are getting answers in that same day without a meeting. Right?
I mean, engineers hate meetings usually. Right. So I'm sure they were happy.
I went to them and solved their problem and said, hey, you hate these meetings, right? Let's try this and so you don't need them, and then you could answer better. But it just became. But the goal was to go ahead and work with the incentives of the existing teams and create it's not always technical, right? A process and people and tools that work together to make it so that their BAU was the most secure option, was the best experience option. Sometimes it's not always possible, but that's the goal, right? And when you can do that, that's what makes it sustainable. That's what makes that channel that we put together 2.5 years ago. Just now, that's how the company, that's just how it runs, right? That's how people get feedback. It's not a mandate that says you have to do things in there. It's just, hey, it's the fastest way I can get answers and I can get my problem solved without meetings.
I think that's the biggest impact, when you can actually make and build something sustainable that people are still using in the long term. And even if after, for example, the teams change or you change the team or someone else there on the team leaves the company, like that, it's still there. I think that's when it's truly valuable. And you can see this impact, and it really gives a lot of pleasure to see that for sure. And you mentioned sometimes some people don't know how things work or how, for example, to code. In these cases, when especially within the past 2 years with the rise of AI and everything, I know you do a lot of gamification and try to educate people on this topic. How do you usually do that? Because you also have your cards that you built for that. Can you tell a little bit more to the audience?
Yeah. So for years, for my role, I just kind of seen as an expert to explain technical topics for various things. And normally I kind of start with hey, this is the mental framework. So that's kind of what I talked about before. Hey, this is what the kill chain is in this framework. I like to go ahead and focus on frameworks and the general processes and things, so that way people can apply their own use cases into those rather than saying, here's this one specific use case. We solve this one use case, but when that use case changes, you have to come back. Right? So that's what I've been, mostly I've been just presenting and talking to people and making materials for, a couple years doing that. Right.
Okay.
I then wanted to go ahead and you mentioned my game, which I released earlier, late last year, which is called Byte Club, which is a cybersecurity like awareness game where you play the kill chain and the NIST framework. Well, the reason why I did that is because I wanted to, some people don't learn by passively listening. I wanted to give a more active way for people to engage with it, right? So, but it's also not reasonable for everyone to build up a technical lab and
Not everyone wants to.
it's not reasonable for the accountant to say, hey, do this programming exercise and try to hack this.
You never know.
Maybe. And if they want to do that, that's great. Go ahead, and those resources are there, right? But I think we can make it a more approachable starting point. And to me, a personal hobby of mine is board gaming and card games and stuff. So I thought an approachable point that I can play with any of my friends or my mom or whatever is playing a game. It's card game. It's fairly unintimidating. And so the idea is that I've given like a 10, 15 minute explanation of these are the frameworks. Then I designed a game that says we're going to experience and do those frameworks. So you can like, now you heard it, you experience it, and then we discuss it. Then we say, hey, you kind of heard the framework, you kind of just experienced and did the framework. Let's talk about a real world use case. Now that might have a little bit more context, right? Yeah. And then we do that every month. We don't play the game, but we have the discussion, right? Every month to reinforce that. Think of it going to the gym and building those mental muscles. Right? Yeah. So it's not just one time. It's not like, hey, you decide one time, it's going to sink in and they're going to be able to apply consistently. It takes...
How much time do you think should it take? Like, how many times do you have to play it?
So, I mean, I think it's going to vary between people, right? I have had people, normally I see people kind of needing to be exposed to it maybe like 3 or 4 times. And then I start seeing people being like speaking in that language. Like I've had like now when we've only done the cyber book clubs for maybe about like 5 months now, right? But like even now when we're moderating discussions, I hear even like the Scrum Master saying, hey, so in the protect stage, maybe we could do bleh. And then yeah, as in the NIST framework, or in the like how did they figure out? Well, when they reconned, they were like searching the web or something like that, right? Like they're using that lingo a little bit to help
security jargon, kind of
a little bit, but yeah, a little. And I know I kind of said it. Maybe I'm
you want to stop it.
Maybe I'm contradicting myself, but there's a difference of giving them a mental framework and scaffolding to work through, and throwing jargon for the sake of jargon. I don't know. And maybe people are gonna comment me on the post on that. I'm happy to discuss. I'm still working through this like everyone.
I mean, at least it helps, I think, to better understand, in any case, why we went language, because it helps us to communicate, and why the language is different, because it just naturally becomes, this way. And I think security jargon, sometimes it's a part of the language that we use as a community. Somehow it also sometimes creates a sense of belonging for certain people in a sense. And I think that's probably why people use that, at least my opinion, sometimes a bit certain more than others, I would say. And since you mentioned that you really like board games, like I usually tend to ask at the end of the podcast the question about what is your favorite book? What book would you recommend? But I think since you're a fan of board games, what, for example, could be a really good game for someone to recommend, security-oriented and not security-oriented?
Yeah, so for security, for like actually getting work done, there's the Evolution EOP, or Evolution of Privileges game by Adam Shostak, that's been around for a while. It has some gamification elements and to help you with threat modeling. That's probably only going to be done in a very specific like work environment, right? For personal and for people that are getting into that hobby, I like a game called Karuba. That's kind of like my gateway game. It's the game that it's 30 minutes. It's a fun little tile laying, build the route. Something my wife, who's not really a gamer, plays. Something my mom will play, but also my gamer friends also like, kind of thing. So it's not too complicated. And I think it's a good place to start.
Okay, I'll put the links under the podcast so people can get started. Maybe for the Easter they'll be able to play that with their family as well. Well, Thank you so much, Michael, for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and I really hope it also inspired some of the listeners of actually building better relationships with their technical and non-technical as well stakeholders within the company. And I hope maybe some of them will be able to build their security champion problems, like 10%, I think it was, of your company, the security
It's about
champion.
10% that have voluntarily are part of the teams that get the invites for stuff. And then we have about maybe 10, 15% of that's actually like actively engaging, something like that.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, still, it's a big number. So I really hope it will inspire someone. So thank you so much, and see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.